Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to the Scottish Learning Festival 2022. I'm Gail Gorman, Chief Executive and His Majesty's Chief Inspector for Education here in Scotland. I'm especially delighted to see you all here today and after what has been a pretty difficult couple of weeks for everyone and for the whole nation. As many of you may know, we previously held the Scottish Learning Festival at the SEC in Glasgow. However, during the pandemic, we moved the festival online and we received great feedback about the flexibility and accessibility the online platform provided. This year, for the first time, we're bringing you a hybrid model with 6 regional events like this happening across Scotland over the next 2 days, along with our full online programme with over 60 seminars for you to choose and select from and to view live and as they are recorded. It's great to see so many people who are passionate about Scottish education here today and be able to offer this in-person event again. It's been a long time since we've been able to do that. I hope most of you have managed to enjoy looking around the showcase, have had some of the delicious cakes on offer, and many thanks to the college students for providing these and catering for us today. In terms of a brief overview of the next few hours, I'll shortly be welcoming our Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Shirley-Anne Somerville, to the stage. We'll then welcome Professor Alma Harris and Professor Carol Campbell, who will officially launch the national discussion before the Cabinet Secretary will announce the winner of this year's Robert Owen Award. Following this, we're delighted to have young people who've joined us today to give us a keynote address, which they'll reflect on their time in Scottish education and what it's like being a student and a learner in our system. This address will be facilitated by Liam Fowley, a former member of the Scottish Youth Parliament, and we're delighted that you're with us today, and some of them have come significant distances. In terms of practicalities, I just wanted to remind everyone about the live streaming of both the keynote sessions as well as photography that will be taking place. If you have any questions at all about these, please reach out to one of my Education Scotland staff who'll be happy to help you. Can I also say there's no planned fire alarm, so if a fire alarm goes off in this venue, please vacate through the doors at the back of the room and you'll be guided by Education Scotland staff. So without further ado, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Shirley-Anne Somerville, will shortly come onto stage, but Cabinet Secretary first asked us to play a short video celebrating some of the wonderful strengths in Scottish education, and we're very pleased to share that with you now.
St Roch's is a very diverse community, very multicultural. We've got over 370 learners, 25 profound learners, and we have children from all over the world. We welcome everyone. We have over 35 languages spoken, and we are from a thriving community, which we're very, very happy to be part of.
We have our faith values, which are family, achieve, inclusion, trust and honesty. And we also have our school motto, which is we can be the best that we can be.
Our children are mainly from backgrounds within the protected characteristics, whether that's ethnicity, faith or barriers to learning. So we have to be brave and design a curriculum that suits our children and our community.
It's an amazing school, amazing being here, and it's such a good opportunity that we get these kind of things into the school and being a part of it all.
Okay, Primary 7B, as Mrs Burns has said, we know our task. On our iPads we're going to be looking at what we're going to be researching, so what we described in our team. So we have the enterprise, so you're looking into what skills we might need to run a business.
Well done. Through observations and things, we found that some children may not necessarily want to make their name indoors, but they'll do it outside. They'll do it outside in the mud, they'll do it outside in the sand. We tend to find that our children, the dirtier the better for them. It means they've had a great day, they've explored lots of different options in the garden.
Roland, you're standing on the ladder!
It teaches you life skills of being in a kitchen, being in front of house. So part of the course was we were in a kitchen, cooking, learning basic skills in the kitchen. Part of it was learning front of house. We learned coffees and different things so we could serve them up to customers as well. That we got to learn how to use a coffee machine.
wasn't that wonderful? And a short snapshot of the fabulous work that goes on in Scottish education today and every day. So I'm now pleased to hand over to the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Shirley Ann Somerville. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail, for providing that overview for the Scottish Learning Festival and introducing this new hybrid format that Education Scotland has moved to this year. It is a delight to be able to be back in person and meeting people directly, but I'm also very recognised at the fact that we have many people joining us online from all over Scotland, and I thank them for their time today. It was great just before we came into this session to have the chance to meet some of the children and young people showing me their skills within STEM and the real enthusiasm that they had about their learning, and what they wanted to show about their learning was really infectious, and it was an absolute pleasure to see. And it's even more of a pleasure, I think, after the past 2 years of not having that opportunity to be able to do that very often. But it is very important that we can gather here, whether it's personally or virtually, to be able to celebrate Scottish education, and particularly to take some time to reflect on what has been an exceptionally difficult time and will continue to be a difficult time as we move in recovery of the pandemic. And it is right that we recognise that it has been a difficult time. You've just seen and heard some of that children and young people in that film that were absolutely fantastic. And that film showed children and young people, parents and carers, teachers and support staff really engaged and flourishing and seizing all the opportunities that their school has given them. And those children and young people that we saw just at the end, who ended the video singing and signing "You're Going to Hear Me Roll," I don't think you can find a better endorsement for our national discussion on education that we're launching today. Now is the real opportunity for children and young people right across Scotland to join in that discussion and to get them ensuring that we hear them roar right through this national discussion. The world around us is evolving all the time, often at pace, and it can feel often out with our control as well, I know. But our education system has to respond and embrace this as we can. Together, if we can be bold and brave and create that aspirational vision that we want for Scottish education, one which leads and drives forward education reform in Scotland, we can put ourselves in a very good place for the future. So there's much to be proud of and to celebrate in Scottish education, and we must never forget that. But we also must never stop. We must always look to the future. And our national discussion, which you'll hear more about later, will help us to achieve that. So I will set out a little bit more about the national discussion in a bit, but firstly I want to reflect on some of the strengths and the successes of our education system. Both the OECD and our International Council of Education Advisors have highlighted that Scotland's education system has an excellent reputation internationally, and our curriculum for excellence has been endorsed both here and around the world as the right foundation for Scottish education. It's here to stay. And we should all be proud of the fact that Scotland has a highly educated population. We've got the highest proportion of adults with tertiary level education than any EU country. And this benefits not just the individuals, but of course has a significant benefit to society and the economy, and of course our international standing. Over the last 10 years, we've seen the poverty-related attainment gap close in a range of indicators, for example, amongst school leavers achieving a pass at higher or equivalent. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, almost 9 out of 10 head teachers who responded to the 2021 head teacher survey reported seeing improvements in closing the poverty-related attainment gap. And this is as a result of the resilience and the hard work of our teachers, support staff and young people. This year, we saw one of the highest ever sets of results in an exam year. Compared with 2019, the last year we had exams, pass rates for National 5, higher and advanced hires are up, and importantly, the attainment gap has narrowed slightly. And it's also been very encouraging to see how many young people have taken advantage of the breadth of choice now available within a senior phase, far beyond what you will see on results day and on an SQA certificates. Those can include skill-based qualifications, awards and certificates, works with our colleges as we see here in Dunfermline with Fife College. All of those are equally important and equally as significant. We also have a record high of full-time first degree entrants to university coming from the most deprived areas in Scotland, and there's been an increase in the number of care experience students at colleges and universities. More school leavers are reaching positive destinations at the end of the school year. And our strong focus on well-being, children's rights, and meeting the needs of all children, including children with additional support needs, is helping work towards our goal of ensuring every young person in Scotland receives an education which maximises their potential. Now, my aim is to ensure that the excellence and equity for all children and young people in Scotland is achieved. Every learner must be supported to reach their potential through education. We have provided significant additional investment for local authorities and head teachers as we prioritise continued improvement in educational outcomes. Although we have provided the funding, it is important that we trust those in education to focus the support where it is needed and therefore where it will make the biggest difference to our learners. Everyone in our education system is completely committed to raising attainment, and as we emerge from the pandemic, it is vital that we place great importance on supporting health and well-being, children's rights, if we are truly to do everything we can to help our children and young people flourish. And of course, we as a government remain committed to incorporating the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child to the fullest extent possible. Health and well-being is a key focus of the record £1 billion worth of investment we're making over the course of this parliamentary term through the Scottish Attainment Challenge, through a combination of investment, targeted support, and by listening and responding to the needs of our learners, we will make as much progress as possible with our aim to substantially eliminate the attainment gap by 2026. Our work to close the attainment gap has been made more challenging by the pandemic and, of course, the cost crisis that we are currently going through this year. But it is more important than ever. The programme for government this year focused on our response to that cost crisis. We're taking as much action as we can to protect learners and their families from the current economic problems. We want to also reduce the variation in the outcomes achieved by learners in different parts of Scotland. Every child should experience the highest quality of learning and teaching to enable them to reach their potential. And we'll work to intensify our work with local authority partners to achieve this. Local authorities are in the process of setting ambitious local stretch aims, which set out the progress they expect to achieve in closing the attainment gap over the next year. And Education Scotland are providing support and constructive challenge to ensure authorities undertake this crucial work. Our investment at the beginning of the education journey is also vital to ensure successful outcomes. Since August 2021, all local authorities in Scotland have been offering 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare to all eligible children, and over 121,000 children were accessing funded ELC at the end of April this year. Scotland is the only part of the UK to offer the equivalent of 30 hours of funded childcare per week in term time to all eligible children, regardless of their parents' working status. That's putting children first. And I'd like to thank all those in local government and right across the childcare sector that are making this happen day in, day out. Now, increasing access to high-quality funded early learning and school-age childcare is key to our national mission to tackle child poverty and support families. This support was always the right thing to do, but it has become even more critical now given the economic situation we're currently facing. And we will go further. In 2022-23, we'll invest another £20 million to design and test options for all year-round school-age childcare systems. And we'll also build on the evidence base that we need to develop a high-quality learning and childcare offer for 1- and 2-year-olds, starting with those who will benefit most. We're committed to helping families with the cost of the school day and to working with our local authority partners to plan for the expansion of free school meal provision to primary 6 and 7 later in this parliamentary term. Now, in the senior phase, we of course saw a return to exams this year. The approach taken to this year's exams reflects the significant disruption that our young people have experienced. The SQA recognises the ongoing impact of the pandemic and is consulting stakeholders, including importantly young people, to determine the approach to grading and appeals in 2023 to ensure results continue to be fair and credible. And we will ensure that by the end of this Parliament, all school-aged children have access to appropriate devices and connectivity to support their learning. So I've outlined many of the successes in our school system, but education, of course, doesn't stop at the school gate. It's part of a lifelong journey. And we should recognise the value in all learner journeys throughout our early learning centres, schools, colleges, universities, professional skill providers, as well as our apprenticeships. But as I said at the outset, while we should be proud of what is being achieved day in, day out right across Scottish education, we must also look to the future. And it's important that I acknowledge and talk about the ambitious programme of education reform that we are currently undertaking to ensure our system remains world-leading now and well into the future. That work is moving at pace, and rightly so. The Education Reform Bill will establish a new independent inspectorate, National Agency for Scottish Education and a qualifications body, with high-level operating models for these bodies developed by the end of 2022. Professor Hayward's independent review of qualifications and assessments will pave the way for future reform to both qualifications in the assessment system in Scotland to ensure our qualifications and assessments approach meets the needs of learners and of society into the 21st century. And we've already started work on developing the purpose and principles for post-school education skills and research. That work will set the ambition and the direction required for the system to ensure everyone has the right skills, knowledge, values and attitudes to achieve their potential. Also, very importantly, as part of our consultation on the Scottish Languages Bill, we are seeking views on a new strategic approach to Gaelic medium education and what action stakeholders want to see in relation to Scots in education too. Now, some of you may feel that there's plenty of discussion already out there on Scottish education in recent years and that we already have an ambitious programme of reform to deliver. Now, both of those are true, but this is exactly why we need a national discussion now, separate to the reform strands that I've already talked about. It's critical that all of the reform is seen as one collective goal, a vision that delivers excellence and equity and is consensual right across our education system. So while the government may be undertaking some work, for example, on the design of our new national agencies, this is something that is not the Scottish Government's work, not even, I don't think, the Scottish Government and COSLA's work, but something that I want to be owned right across the education system. And delivery in action is critical to this. So the national discussion will provide Scottish education with the right platform to take the lead and to set our own direction for the future with as much consensus as possible. We should be bold, be brave, and we should inspire those right across the system to help us achieve this vision so we can get it right. And so I'm here today to launch a unique and exciting opportunity to meaningfully engage in shaping the future of Scottish education. Let's Talk Scottish Education, our national discussion, co-convened by the Scottish Government and COSLA, will focus on how we get even better and build an education system fit for the future. It is an unprecedented opportunity for children and young people to shape the future based on their experiences, perspectives and aspirations. And we've appointed two independent facilitators, Professor Carol Campbell and Professor Alma Harris, who are here with us today. They are global experts in education and highly valued colleagues who are committed very deeply to Scottish education. They will help us to shape how we engage, to ensure that we are as inclusive as possible, and you'll hear more from them later. Now, the Scottish Government and COSLA are strongly committed to working together and listening carefully to the views of learners and those who support them during this national discussion. My promise to you today is that this national discussion will be different. It will be different because we will stay true to Professor Muir's recommendations, and this is very much a recommendation that was born from his work. We will develop it with those who want to be heard, but aren't always listened to by the system, with inclusion and diversity as guiding principles as we work through this. Listening to our children and young people and responding to their expectations, their reality and their lived experience will be crucial. We know already that they want to see more concerted action on how our education system addresses racism, gender equality, climate change, children's rights and LGBT rights, and we are already working on those priorities. But if our education system can put learners truly at the centre and be responsive to all the needs and circumstances, then we will get it right for everyone. This afternoon I visited Carnegie Primary School, just a few minutes walk away from the campus here, where I saw children taking part in the national discussion, supported by their teachers and support workers, including their head teacher. Not only were we able to see learning in practice, but I was truly blown away by the discussion that the children had around what they are proud of in their school and what they think our priorities should be in education. And this was all done using a resource developed by Education Scotland to support the national discussion, to facilitate that type of conversation. They were very, very able to tell me what they thought about Scottish education and where our priorities should be. It was engaging, it was inclusive, it was insightful, and it was fun. And that's exactly what I hope that we can deliver through the national discussion conversations that will be happening right across Scotland in our classrooms. So there's no doubt that we have our strengths in Scottish education, and there's no doubt that we should be rightly proud of that. Our system is recognised as being world leading. But building a vision of excellence and equity that we have developed together right across our education system will provide us with the right platform to deliver for our children and young people for generations to come. And I want to strive for an education system that we can continue to be proud of. And I know that everyone can help us achieve this ambitious goal. Now, as I mentioned just now, the national discussion is being co-convened by the Scottish Government and our local authority partners at COSLA. And while Councillor Buchanan, COSLA's Children and Young People spokesperson, is unable to join us in Dunfermline today, he wanted to highlight the importance that we have all placed on learning in Scotland and the joint responsibility that we have from national and local government and what comes to education and what that should look like in the future. So I'm very delighted with the hope that the technology will work to introduce a short video clip from Councillor Buchanan just now.
Hello everyone, I'm Councillor Tony Buchanan and I'm the COSLA Children and Young People spokesperson. COSLA is the membership organisation for local government in Scotland and represents all 32 councils, and I have the privilege of chairing our Children and Young People board. I'm really sorry I can't join you in person today and disappointed to be missing out on your Learning Festival. I know it will be a great event, having seen the programme and knowing the vast amount of expertise and enthusiasm for learning you all bring. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you briefly by video as we launch Let's Talk Scottish Education. Let's Talk Scottish Education has its roots in Professor Ken Muir's report, published earlier this year. Local government warmly welcomed Professor Muir's findings, in particular the recommendation to create a long-term, compelling and consensual vision for Scottish education. A number of reports and reviews have been published in recent months and years, demonstrating the importance we as a country place on learning and supporting our children and young people. There is also, of course, an ongoing process to reform our national education bodies. It is therefore timely that we as an educational system develop a long-term approach and vision for the next 20 years, which guides our ongoing efforts when it comes to continuously improving the learning experiences of our children and young people in Scotland. In Scotland, responsibility and accountability for education is shared by local government and Scottish Government. The co-convening of this national discussion demonstrates that. For our learners and families to thrive, both spheres of government must continue to work together through an agreed approach which meets the education challenges of the future. That said, neither Scottish Government nor local government are the key stakeholders in this work. Children, young people, their families and their workforce are. Children, young people, school staff and their communities have demonstrated much resilience and commitment over the past few years in responding to the pandemic and supporting each other. It's the right time now to take stock of what is working well, what could work better, and how we plan for an ever-changing world. As I said, this isn't about politicians' views. It's important that everyone, including those whose voices we don't always hear, are able to take part and share their ideas for the future. Children and young people's views are going to be key, even more so given the commitment to incorporating the UNCRC into the law in Scotland. That's why COSLA will be working with all councils to support events across Scotland, in our schools and in our communities, to give everyone the opportunity to be involved in ways that work for them. My thanks to Professor Campbell and Professor Harris for their work as independent facilitators. The work they've done so far and the work they will do in the coming months to support this discussion and distill the learning. I'm looking forward to the journey as much as the findings, and I hope to have the opportunity to meet with many of you during that journey. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I hope you have a learning-filled festival and look forward to hearing about it from colleagues. Thank you.
It's always relief when the technology works. Great. My last task for a little while at least is to hand over to our co-facilitators so you can hear directly from them. And I think it's Professor Campbell that's going to go first. So thank you very much for your time. And Professor Campbell.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that introduction. I'm Carol Campbell and I'm joined by Alma Harris. So as co-facilitators, we're going to do a double act for you this evening. Thank you to those of you who are here in person with us in Fife. Thank you to those of you who are joining online. And thank you to those of you who may be watching this as a recording in the future. We really appreciate you being here and your interest in this work. So it's our absolute delight to be part of launching the national discussion today. As you can imagine, there's been work ongoing over the summer to prepare for this launch. So today we're like, phew, we're finally getting to do it. You can see from our title slide, we're referring to this as our national discussion, as in your national discussion, because this doesn't belong to Alma and I, or Scottish Government, or COSLA. This is about the people of Scotland. It's really important that you're involved, particularly children and young people, but all that are involved in education in Scotland. So for those of you who are on social media, we're using the hashtag #TalkScottishEducation, so please feel free to tweet away and add to this conversation as we move forward. You've already heard from the Cabinet Secretary and Councillor Buchanan some of the background to why a national discussion and why now. Some of you may be familiar with Professor Muir's report. His recommendation number one, was that it was time to have a discussion about the future of Scottish education. And his recommendation number two was that should be as inclusive as possible, to think about all of the people who are involved in education and more broadly in our communities. And his report was called Putting Learners at the Centre. So that's what we are committed to doing. Alma and I agreed to do this because we think it's really important. We believe in this. Both of us have had careers in education, still in education, and we believe in the importance of supporting children and young people. We believe in the importance of education, and we've both been involved in Scottish education over the years. All of my own education was in Scotland, and my career began here. So we're doing this because we believe in it, personally and professionally. And we agree that this is the right time. We realise there are a whole lot of things going on at the moment, but it's 20 years since Scotland had a conversation about education. And you all know the world has changed dramatically in those 20 years.
There's still a global pandemic, the economy's changing, society's changing, what children and young people need to know and do is changing. So that, of course, has implications for education. The United Nations for the Convention of the Rights and Children's Rights has also been incorporated into legislation here in Scotland. And under that right, children have a right to be supported to develop to their fullest potential. They have a right to recognise and respect diversity in our society, to aim to live in a peaceful world, to care for the planet. So if we're going to take that seriously, we really need to think about how we support children and young people who are the future of Scotland and indeed our world. It's been referred to that there are and have been many reviews of Scottish education, and many of you probably have contributed to some of those reviews. So in fact, the first thing Alma and I did was read all the previous reviews, because we're academics and that's the sort of thing we do. But we recognise there's been a lot already said about Scottish education, including by children and young people. So we're starting from there. But we want to do something different. We're not going to ask questions that have been asked before. This is not about reviewing the present or the past. It's looking to the future. In fact, looking 20 years into the future, but recognising that in order to get there, we need to make changes, because this is about the future generation. So we appreciate all of the work that's been done. We also recognise there's really great work happening in Scotland, and we want to profile that work and celebrate it. This isn't about changing everything, it's about celebrating Scotland. So we want to do this in a distinctive way. We want to try and offer people an opportunity to look to the future, to offer your views, your voices, your perspectives, your experiences, and to think about how we can support moving forward together. We have been asked to develop a clear vision for the future of Scottish education, one that recognises children and young people's needs, the challenges as well as the opportunity, and how we support them forward for the ambitions and aspirations of the people of Scotland. And so the big idea of this national discussion is to ask what kind of education will be needed by children and young people in Scotland in the future, and how do we make that a reality? That's the big question. So the discussion is broad-based. People ask, what do we mean by future? Well, I've already said up to 20 years, but thinking in the next year and the years beyond. And then in terms of education, the scope is mainly around early years and school-age education, but recognising the important role of colleges and of adult learners and of all the people that contribute to education in Scotland. We want to hear from as many people as possible. We hope to hear from thousands of people. We want to hear from as many people as possible. We want to hear particularly from children and young people, but also recognising that the adults that support, care for and work with those children are very important too. The people that work in education, parents, carers, employers, wider community members. We're launching this here. We want this to be a high-profile public engagement. We don't want this to be a conversation just within the education system. We actually want to reach out to communities and to families and more widely. So we will be using social media and other mechanisms, working with local authorities to think about how can this be a discussion across Scotland. So a clear vision is where we're aiming for. You will recognise that that will include having to think about and listen to and represent the wide range of perspectives we anticipate hearing, but thinking about how we can come together, hopefully, on a clear vision for the future of Scottish education to meet the needs of all learners. However, we've already heard, and we only launched today, but in our early discussions with parents and carers and children and young people in the education profession, that a vision's not sufficient, that we need to think about action. So we're hoping that this discussion will be a call to action, that the people that participate, that engage, we'll keep moving forward with saying, this is what we've asked for. Now we need to make it happen together. We need to think about what would be the priorities if this vision were to become reality and what that might look like in the short, medium and long term. So we're calling on you to engage, to encourage the people that you know, you work with, your families to engage, and to think about both what we need for children and young people and how we make that a reality. And I'll hand over to Professor Harris.
Thanks, Carol. There's nothing quite like being the last speaker, so there we go. I just wanted to say that Scotland doesn't do things easily. This is an ambitious and a bold move on behalf of Scottish education. There are a few other countries that have done this, and I emphasise the few. Iceland, New Zealand and Singapore. This is not an easy thing to take on. And I'm delighted that we have some young people in the audience. I hope you're not leaving because of me. It sometimes happens. And we have, as the Cabinet Secretary said, we were with the young people this morning. And I think, you know, what I've heard today has been hugely inspiring. We know the strengths of Scottish education. This is not about a discussion about the weaknesses. Every education system has weaknesses, including my own. But in Wales right now, we're not embarking on a national discussion. And frankly, we should be, because the time is right to do it. Post-COVID, with everything that all education systems are facing, it's the right time. So what Carol's outlined is bold and ambitious and slightly nerve-wracking, really, because we've been given this mantle of being the facilitators. We have no particular vested interest. That's the really important thing to say. This is not our discussion, it's your discussion, and we'll simply be facilitating it. But the important point that has already been raised, and we cannot really, this has to be authentic, we cannot move away from this. This is about young people and children. It's about hearing their views, first and foremost. And if we fail on that, we'll fail on the whole national discussion. This is a public call, I guess, for people to engage in a conversation, a discussion, whatever you wish to call it, about education in Scotland. We've been asked questions today about where will we find the time? Well, the thing is, there's a real distinction between the latest things and the right things. And sometimes we get distracted by the latest things and we forget about the right things. And I think this national discussion is the right thing at the right time. And for all right things, we will find the time. There are different ways of engaging in this discussion. There are different access points. And that will suit people with different time constraints. But ultimately, what Carol and I aim to do, and maybe this is very ambitious as well, is we aim to listen and to learn and to represent. And that last point is really important, the representation of views that we hear around this very strong education system. Which button do I press? Oh, that one. And we have emphasised throughout the preparation for this that young people and children have to be at the epicentre, because this future of Scottish education isn't ours, it's theirs. So unless we listen to their viewpoints, unless we authentically capture them, then what we'll have is a national discussion from the usual suspects saying the usual things. So Carol and I will keep our word, and we will listen to children and young people first and foremost. That doesn't mean we'll discount the other players, but this is not a discussion that is about us. It's about the future of an education system in Scotland 20 years hence that is fit for purpose, is excellent and equitable. We've started some work on the main themes. We're not calling them questions because we haven't really got to the point of road testing some of these things. And we've underlined in these main themes the word our, because it is not our discussion, it's your discussion. And we focus on a couple of things that we think are critically important to young people. After COVID, we know internationally that our young people have suffered, not just educationally, but in their well-being and mental health. We cannot escape but look at that. Equity, our future world, as Carol said, is changing. We have some questions, but if you look at number 2, question number 2, this is as important as asking what must change. What do we need to consolidate? What is good about Scottish education? What needs to stay and why? This is not about change for change's sake. This is not another review. This is a national discussion that says what needs to stay, what maybe needs to change, and what can we do better. These are the questions that only the people that we talk to can answer. It's not our education system, it's your education system. We also have some questions linked to some of those key themes, and they may change. They're not set in stone. They're there to really engender an authentic discussion. In terms of contributions, there are multiple ways of contributing. And again, I emphasize the point that your time constraints will dictate how you will engage in this discussion. But one thing is clear. Unless we get multiple voices, unless we get multiple perspectives, we're not going to have the rich future agenda for Scottish education. One final point. Education is everybody's business. So this national discussion couldn't be more important, more timely, and more critical. But let's make sure that everybody's voices are heard. And let's start with children and young people, because quite frankly, their voices matter most. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our contributors there. Folks, my name's Ollie Bray and I work for Education Scotland, and I've just been asked to facilitate a bit of a question and answer session, if that's okay, and I think this is really important, and there'll be lots of questions probably coming from that about what the Cabinet Secretary said and also about the nature of the national discussion. And we're going to sort of try and do it, if it's okay, in sort of three ways. So when you signed up to attend this event, there was an opportunity to submit some questions in advance. There were a number of questions that were submitted in advance. I've picked 3 hard ones, which I'm going to ask around that. We've also, it's important to acknowledge that we've got some people that are out there in the audience in sort of cyberspace that are joining us as well. And there's a huge amount of people that are online sort of joining this session as well. And they're going to submit some questions via Lee and Graham down here, which is going to miraculously then go via some sort of satellite up in the air and down to my iPad. So I'll pick some questions out of there as well. Just because, well, it's also important that we've got lots of people in the room, we're also going to sort of take some questions from the room, you know, as well. I think that's really, really important. So there's an opportunity here to ask questions and to do all of these things. So if you're in the room now, you can maybe sort of have a little think about what you want to say. If you submitted a question in advance and I read it out, then don't ask that question. Obviously, think of a different question, you know, around that. And we've probably got about 20 minutes for questions, folks, if that's okay. One of the things I just sort of ask people to do, if it's all right, is that when we get into the stage where we're asking questions, if you could just maybe sort of say who you are around that, that'd be really, really important, just to sort of put that in context. That would be great. And again, we're looking for kind of like, no, I'm conscious I'm in a room of educators here. We're looking for kind of like short, sharp, succinct questions here around that, not kind of personal statements or job CVs or anything like that. So short, sharp, succinct questions, you know, to ask. And if I could ask the panel members, short, sharp, succinct answers with that as well, because we've only got 20 minutes left. So as I say, we'll just sort of get sort of warmed up around that. But if you are online and you can hear me, and hopefully the technology is working, if you can start to put any questions into the chat, and we'll start to pull them through to the iPad. But I'll maybe just sort of start with a couple of the pre-questions. And Cabinet Secretary, it's okay, I'll start with you around that. I think that we heard, a lot of things within the national discussion conversation around the kind of the short term, the medium term, and the long term. I was hearing that over the next sort of 20 years. But I just wonder, Cabinet Secretary, if we were to sort of concentrate on the short term, perhaps the priorities for this sort of school year, what would your main sort of priorities be for that?
Thanks. But it's also difficult for politicians to keep their answers short, but I'll try my best for you, Ollie. I think, separate to what's going on in the national discussion, I would highlight two issues. One is the closure of the poverty-related attainment gap and the government's determination to move on with that at pace. Yes, it's been affected by COVID, but we need to move on with that at pace, and that is certainly my top priority. And the other one is the reform package that sits out with the national discussion, and that's the parts of the reform process that I am personally responsible for, including the reform of our agencies. So there are different strands of reform going on, some of which are for our co-facilitators. That much is very much down to me, and it's absolutely my determination by the end of this year that we'll have operating models for our new agencies ready for our delivery in the future years, so we can see what the detail of that looks like. So if you pick two, I would pick those two.
Great, that's brilliant. Thanks for that. And again, feel free. We're going to take one other question from up here, right? Then we're going to go out to the audience, so kind of prepare yourself for that. And we've got a few people that have got roving mics that will sort of come around and take those questions when we've got it. But I'll maybe just pass another question over to Professor Harris and Professor Campbell. Cabinet Secretary, you may wish to sort of come in as well. You can argue amongst yourselves who wants to answer it around that. This is a good question, I think. So the question is, could we have a citizens' assembly on the future of education as part of the conversation? The two assemblies to date have gathered very useful information on people's views. A similar process focused on education could help the way forward for the future. So a question about a citizens' assembly gathering information. Any views on that?
Well, as Alma and I both said, we want people to engage in a way that is appropriate to them. And we want to hear from as many people as possible. So if people want to have a citizens' assembly, that is certainly a way of having a conversation. While we are the independent co-facilitators, we obviously will not be facilitating every discussion that happens across Scotland. So I would say part of this is actually calling out to people who want to arrange local discussions, school discussions, community discussions, citizens' assemblies, all of these pieces. Because what we need, as well as the big ideas, is some concrete suggestions for what this might look like. And when citizens' assemblies are done well, they can be provocative in terms of sharing different ideas and future thinking ideas. So personally, I would welcome that.
Great, thanks, Professor Campbell. And I've seen some of the documentation that's sort of coming out to sort of support the national discussion. And I know that you're welcoming any type of conversation or any type of discussion from a coffee chat to a chat in a staff room to something which is a bit more facilitated around that. Okay, folks, we're going to go out to the audience first of all. I've got a preference for at least one question from this side and at least one question from this side around that. So if we could maybe get somebody to sort of put a hand up if you'd like to ask a question, and we can get one of our roving reporters. So I can see a hand at the back over there. And then we could maybe sort of just try and get another hand just now. We'll take that question first, then we'll sort of try and get another hand. Anybody from this side over here? This side is letting me down. Feels like a school assembly at the moment. Okay, have a think over here. Okay, we've got the question from the back then, please.
Sorry, this is a very specific question. It's Dan Woodcraft from Valley Primary School in Kirkcaldy in Fife. One of the suggestions was an online survey. Is there an actual link for that, or is that something that's planned to happen at some point?
Carol or Elma, do you want to pick up on that?
There is a survey and it has gone live, but I cannot remember the URL link, so I'm hoping somebody in the room knows. It's all clear. Claire, can you help me out here, please?
It's posted in the chat, so you should be able to see it on the live feed for today, but we'll circulate it afterwards as well.
And hopefully if you Google national discussion on Scottish education, so the website's gone live today, and there's lots of resources on there. So there's a survey, but there's also like an open portal for people who want to submit written, video, audio, and there's discussion guides for people who want perhaps a slightly more structured conversation. Thanks for the question.
And again, I think for some of the things I saw, some of the guides are age appropriate for different audiences around that as well. We mentioned there about trying to get this to the top of Google. For those of you that sort of understand that algorithm will take a while, hopefully a couple of days, depending on how many people participate in that. But my next question, which has come in via my magic tablet, is kind of linked to that. It's kind of linked to algorithms, in some ways, because it's talking about the curriculum for a changing world. And this one is coming in for you, Cabinet Secretary, but others may want to contribute as well. So the question is, how is the curriculum adapting to an ever-changing world that we're in, especially in terms of automated software, automated cars, etc., building soft skills such as 21st century skills for the age that we're in, and how do we intend to resource that? Sorry, not an easy one.
I think it's one of the major challenges that we all have to live up to. I'm sure it will form part of the national discussion as well about how we develop our education system for a changing world. But when you're looking at curriculum, I think we have the right foundation for that in Curriculum for Excellence that is flexible. It's has an ability to be able to adapt to an ever-changing world. But we're keen to ensure that we keep reviewing Curriculum for Excellence. That was part of the recommendations for the OECD to make sure we're keeping that relevant. So we have the right foundation for that if we keep keeping that up to date. And then I think the next challenge is being able to support teachers and other staff to be able to provide that teaching and learning to our children and young people. So one of the aspects I'm very keen that we look at within our wider reform, not the national discussion, but the reform package that is developing this year and into next, is what can the new agencies do that better support our teachers and support staff to develop that type of curriculum for the future. And that's one of the aspects that I think there's a great deal of good work that goes on at the moment, but how do we take that to the next level? So I think our foundations are right. I'm keen to see what we can do to make sure we further improve that, to ensure that whatever teachers are needing, our agencies are established in a way that allows that to happen.
That's great, thank you. Right, folks, just to give you a quick update here, this side of the room is winning, right, in terms of questions. Around this side of the room isn't winning. I've also got 7 online questions that are stacked up here. Right, so we're just going to go out to this side of the room. Do you want to sort of try and redeem yourself here? Have we got a question and a hand up? A question down here? Liam.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Liam. I feel like I've got to let the side up, so I've thought of a question. A lot of discussion, really good to hear about the importance of the voice of children and young people in the national discussion. It'd be interesting to hear more about the specific mechanisms of doing that, and a double barreler, perhaps the other side to that of how you're going to feed back to children and young people about what's being done with their views and opinions.
Professor Harris, Professor Campbell?
There are a range of age-specific sort of instruments that we'll be using to generate conversations and discussions with children and young people. And one of the things that we haven't said perhaps clearly enough, and that is the discussion is not the end point. We are looking, one of the outcomes of this national discussion will be a call to action with very specific short-term, medium-term and long-term goals. Because, again, we will have failed if the discussion just ebbs and dies. Nice discussion, but what happened? You know, I hear a lot from different countries, the mantra, so much reform, so little change. And I think this is a call to action that is about meaningful change that makes a difference to the life chances of learners. So, yes, there are a whole range of different routes, age-related, but primarily we're also asking for some solutions as well, not just a sense of, I think this is important, why, so what? So that call to action is a really, really important part of this national discussion.
And just from that, you've actually answered one of the questions that was coming through in the chat there as well. But there's also a number of different comments in with people hearing that this is just as much about the how as it is about having the conversation as well. So that's great. So the way that this tablet works, folks, is that people ask questions, and those that are involved online or those that are on your phones underneath the tables here get the chance to sort of vote questions up around that. So This is a sort of link question in one way. This has got quite a lot of votes online. So many third sector organisations support the education of our children and young people and sit outside the system. How do we ensure that they're part of the discussion around that? Any sort of views or thoughts on that?
Yeah, and also thanks for your question around the podium. So the very first groups that we met with were children's rights organisations and young people's rights organisations. And then we've met with parents and carers, and we've also obviously met with educators and local authorities. And basically we're saying help, because you probably know better than we do how best to reach out to the people that are your peers in your community and the people that you work with or are engaged with. So that's why we're stressing the broad range of open submissions that can be done as a video, if a video is more attractive to people, could be done as a picture for somebody who's younger or doesn't want to write, or can be part of conversations in other places. Third sector organisations, absolutely. So while we're talking, of course, about a future for education, we see that broadly. We've absolutely recognise that education happens beyond school walls, beyond early years, and we really need the support of everyone that's involved in any way in supporting children and young people's learning and development. Don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, just to add to what Carol's saying, I think it is really important we see this in the broadest sense, and hopefully when people are going online and seeing the resources, the resources and the toolkits that are out there are there for different audiences. So there is the age-appropriate material for our children and young people. There's aspects that teachers may be able to take forward within a school setting, aspects that we can take forward within parental settings, but so importantly, we all know there are so many people involved in education, and that is why the toolkits have been developed in the way that they have. But I suppose what I would also say is, if people are looking at the toolkits and think that we've missed something, or there's an angle that we're missing, we want to solve that and we want to make sure this is as broad as possible. The only other thing I'll add is all the toolkits and the resources have been designed starting with the hard work that the professors have done with children and young people at the outset. So the questions aren't their questions. We haven't came up with this within government. These are questions that have started from discussions with children and young people, and I hope that demonstrates how right from the start they have been at the heart of this, and they will continue to be at the heart of this all the way through.
Thank you. Okay, it's 1-1. We've got a question over here. Gentleman down in the front row. We've got a runner there. There's Louise.
Thank you very much. It's Alan Horbury, head teacher at Banff Academy in Aberdeenshire. So my question is for the Cabinet Secretary, in that our education system is entirely dependent on the teachers that are in it. And albeit that we've got fantastic professional learning opportunities provided by Education Scotland and others, the picture across Scotland is varied in terms of workforce planning. And I just wonder if the government have got any plans to make teaching more attractive a profession, recognise and welcome the massive investment that government have made in terms of funding teachers, but if the graduates aren't there, then the money can't be spent. So I just wonder if there are any plans to make teaching the best job in the world, which it is.
Well, I think you raise a very important point about how we look at this right across the country. And while we have areas of the country that I know are still having difficulty, your area in particular, but there are others attracting staff into particular subjects or in particular areas of the country. So I think there's two challenges. How do we make teaching more attractive in general, and I think that is an important aspect to take on, but also how we work with our local authorities to deal with some of those local issues that are in some ways quite specific to Aberdeenshire, some very specific to the borders or to Highlands and Island communities. So there's two parts to this, I think, and I'm very keen to work with local authorities who should learn from each other about some of the innovative ways they are looking at recruitment and retention, because not all local authorities do this in the same way, and quite rightly, because we should have variation in local authorities. But I think there is good practice out there in some areas that maybe others can learn on how they continue to recruit into areas that are difficult. But I do recognise we have a challenge in particular subjects, that's an area we're looking at for STEM bursaries, for example, to encourage more and more people into STEM, changing careers. We need to look at then how we encourage people into different parts of the country as well. But I need to work with my local authority partners on that, who have the responsibility for recruitment intention. There is innovation out there. It's perhaps the variation in that innovation is something that we can all work together on.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the endorsement of the Education Scotland professional learning programmes, which coincidentally come under my remit, folks, Education Scotland. So there's a question online, and it's on fire, is the only way to describe that. Like probably how most of us feel in the room at the moment, because it is quite warm, isn't it, around that? Elma, you kind of already hinted a little bit at this. I'll read you the question in a minute. I'm just sort of trying to build up the suspense, is around the difference between the latest and the right things around that. So this is the question. It's got lots of sort of likes. So how do we ensure that all involved in education do not become weary of consultations and discussions given the national discussion, Hayward Review and the ongoing education reform? So I know that we've sort of partly tackled that, but because it's had sort of so many online votes, I felt I had to ask it again, really.
I think the right things you can always test. There's a litmus test in the system from professionals, from young people. Is this the right thing? I mean, I see systems around the world borrowing the policies of other systems and then being really surprised when they don't work. And I think there's something here about policy learning and recognising that there are good things in the Scottish education system that can be actually expanded and extended. So I think that ultimately the right thing comes down to your system and what's right for your system right now. I don't believe in policy borrowing. It's a bit like ripe fruit, really. It just goes bad and horribly wrong. I think you look towards your own system, you look within, you look for the good, and you test out what is the right thing to do and forget the latest things that others may be doing. That takes bravery, that takes courage, that takes commitment. And that's why I think this national discussion is the right thing to do.
Thanks, thank you, Professor Harris. Okay, I'm going to take, I've got one more question here that I would like to ask, but it can be trumped by anybody in the room, if anybody would like to ask that. And just to kind of warn, that's great, so we've got one over here, so we'll just in the microphone, just to sort of warn the panel members that once we've had this question, we'll sort of close for questions, but I'll just maybe just invite each member of the panel, if they want to, just to make a closing remark about some of the things or something they've not had a chance to sort of say as part of that. Is there another one over here as well? Did it see? Okay, well, I think we've probably got time for 2 questions, but we'll start over here if that's okay.
Thank you. Julie Kennedy, Skills Development Scotland. Can I ask the panel to expand on what success will look like and feel like for our young people in, say, 5 or 20 years' time? What are we aspiring for that culture to be?
Okay, good question. What does success look like in 5 to 10 years or 20 years' time, I suppose?
So I think there's different avenues to use to this. Success for many will include the qualifications that we think of regularly when we think of education. We need to think of success broader than that, though, and I think that ties into the curriculum for excellence and how we need to ensure that we are developing learners for society and for the economy in ways that just qualifications doesn't look like. That's why I'm so keen that we look at wider achievement and we look at wider recognition of what happens within our education system as part of this national discussion. So I think success will be different for different young people depending on what they want to achieve in life. So we have to look at what's right for the economy, of course we do, and there's massive opportunities for us in terms of green jobs, green skilling if we can get that right. But success can and should look different for a young person, and too often I think we see that through too narrow a lens. And I know there's lots of people in education that are trying to push that boundary and make sure that we talk about wider achievement and not just talk simply about assessments and qualifications. That's one of the things I would really like to see happen as we move through this. I know we've been trying to do that for some time, but I think success can vary And that is okay in a system. That is actually the right thing, because it means that we've allowed that learner to achieve success in whichever way they wish. And it might not be in a traditional academic fashion, but it doesn't make it any less successful.
Thank you. And we'll maybe just take one last question from over here. Again, if we could just ask you to introduce yourselves.
Patricia Flannery, Charter Teacher of Home Economics from St Andrews High School in Kirkcaldy. It was just really a question based on something that Professor Harris had said earlier on, that they were hoping to come out of this with action, and they didn't just want to talk and keep the talking going, that they had to have something to come with and suggestions. One suggestion I would make as I leave education, I'm coming towards the end of my education career, that I think it would be startling if everybody in Scotland, when they left school, could actually effectively read and write, so that they could do something like read the instructions in a paracetamol bottle when they're looking after their small children. Just basic common decency things. And it hurts greatly that children are still leaving our schools today without the ability to effectively read and write for themselves.
So I don't know if anybody's got any sort of comments on that. Sounds like an important part of the discussion, though, to sort of feed that in as part of that. I don't know whether Professor Campbell, Professor Harris, Cabinet Secretary, you want to come in to respond?
So part of my background is in literacy and numeracy, so the capacity to read, write and do mathematics is absolutely fundamental. So I agree with the importance of that. It's not just a learning issue, it's an equity issue to support. Back to the question of success, how we equip people to be successful.
Okay, thank you, Professor Campbell. Okay, I said that I'd give everybody just a chance for some closing remarks before we get on to the next part of the evening. Professor Harris, maybe could we start with you?
That was surprising. Yes. The first thing I want to say is that I did not know that Fife had a tropical climate, but there we go. You learn something on your travels. I guess my final remark is about the profession, is about teachers, and the recognition that teachers' teaching conditions are learners' learning conditions. So the better we make teachers' conditions, the better we make learners' conditions.
Thank you. Professor Campbell?
Well, I want to say thank you again for joining this conversation tonight, and I hope that you will be part of the national discussion. We officially launched today, so please take a look. Even though I can't remember the exact online address, it's on the Scottish Government website, so the materials are now there. But what we do know from other countries that have attempted to do this work, it has to be designed together. It has to be co-developed. It can't be a report that we produce and people then say, what the heck is that? Because it's really the follow-up and the implementation that's extremely important. So this national discussion is live in terms of public engagement to December the 5th. So if you look at the resources and you say, we need more resources, we need different things to engage children and young people or to engage the profession, let us know, because we could shape this together. We want this to be really meaningful and supportive. So please help us with this process, engage and spread the word. And for those of you that are on social media, we'll be happy to engage with you there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary, last final thoughts from you?
Thanks. I'll leave you with a final thought that will stay with me long after today, and that's the way that we spent the afternoon at Carnegie Primary School with children and young people, listening directly to them. It was just the most brilliant discussion to be part of, where we had different children right from the earliest years of primary all the way up to the primary sevens, taking part in a really meaningful discussion where they added and contributed different parts and inspired each other and encouraged each other to be part of the conversation. If we could just bottle that and encourage people to take that away and do something similar, it was just the most fantastic way to spend an hour. So I would very much encourage everyone to get involved as they can, from this is a real opportunity, and I was certainly really heartened by what I saw at Carnegie today.
That's great. And I think that's a great way to sort of finish that part of it, sort of going back to actually this is a national discussion that's involving all young people, or as many young people as possible that we want to do. So bringing that back to this afternoon's activities and right in the heart of the schools is an important thing. Folks, can I just ask for a round of applause for our panel members here around there? Okay, we're going to stop for a short break in a second. Oh, I'm about to be told something. Yeah. We're going to stop for a short break in a second, but before we do that, I'm going to ask the Cabinet Secretary to sort of come back to the lectern and present this year's Robert Owen Award. So for those of you that have been involved in the Scottish Learning Festival for a while now, the Robert Owen Award is something that we tend to present at a Scottish Learning Festival, whether we've done that face to face in the past or whether we've done that virtually. And as you'll see this year, I think we're taking a hybrid approach to the presentation of the Robert Owen Award. So Cabinet Secretary, thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Me again, but I promise I won't be long because I don't know how warm it is in the audience, but it is tropical up here on the stage, and yes, the sun always shines in Fife, Alma. It's always like this. But it is with great pleasure that I'm able to present the Robert Owen Award for 2022. This award began in 2013 and recognises renowned educationalists whose work has made a significant contribution to Scottish education and who best exemplify the vision, principles and values of Robert Owen. Robert Owen himself was a visionary social reformer who advocated for significant social change to improve the lives of working class people with a central focus on education. To date, the award has been presented to colleagues from across the world, but I'm delighted to say that this year's award in Scotland goes to Scotland's very own Larry Flanagan. So as many of you will know, Larry began his career as a teacher of English and drama before moving on to become a principal teacher, deputy head teacher and staff tutor, and ultimately, of course, General Secretary of the Educational Institute of Scotland. During his time as General Secretary, Larry has been a force for good in the pursuit of quality education that has equity, equality and social justice at its very heart. Larry's contribution to equality within Scotland's education system spans the length of his career, from his work as a staff tutor on multicultural and anti-racist education during the 1980s to the establishment in 2017 of the EIS Scottish Government collaboration in order to achieve anti-poverty professional learning for all Scotland's teachers, and countless other initiatives in between. Far too many to fit into any speech, although if Larry was here in person, I'm sure he would try. I can say that because you might have guessed by now we're doing this hybrid and Larry is not in the room with us tonight. But as a teacher for over 3 decades, Larry's work has impacted the lives and the life chances of countless young people within the school communities he served. Communities which needed innovative approaches to overcome socioeconomic disadvantage and vast ethnic, linguistic and cultural diversity. Larry's influence has also impacted many colleagues with whom he has generously shared his knowledge and his skills. Until his retirement, Larry continued to advocate fiercely for the profession across a range of national contexts, while always seeking to put children and young people at the heart of Scottish education. This dedication to supporting children and young people in both a professional and a personal capacity has made Larry an inspiration to many in the profession, and I very much believe makes him a very worthy recipient of the Robert Owen Award this year. Now, unfortunately, as I say, Larry is unable to join us because he may have retired, but he is certainly not keeping his life quiet, and he is exceptionally busy. But he has sent us a short video to accept the award.
Hello everybody, my apologies for not being able to be in person at the award ceremony, but despite retirement, my diary seems to be fairly busy. I am absolutely delighted and indeed very honoured to be announced as the recipient of the Robert Owen Award, and I'd like to express my thanks to everyone involved in the nomination and decision, and my thanks to Shirley Ann for the presentation this morning. I began my teaching career in Blantyre High, or Blantyre High, depending on how local you are. So Lanarkshire was part of my early teaching experience, and obviously the Robert Owen story around New Lanark featured very much in the lives of the schools in Lanark Division. In my early EIS career in the 80s, we were involved in a major pay campaign against the Thatcher government, and Lanark Division, or Lanarkshire Local Association of the EIS, broke with tradition in commissioning a new banner, because for the first time it wasn't in the royal colours of purple and green, but we commissioned a red banner, and on the banner were two icons. One was the Socialist nominee John McLean, and the other was Robert Owen, against a backdrop of the mills in New Lanark. And we were very proud of the banner. It now hangs in headquarters in Murray Place, because it did epitomise, I think, the type of values that we wanted to aspire to. And looking back on the life of Robert Owen and the New Lanark project, then the values which he espoused in terms of a strong belief in community, a strong belief in the power of education, and a very strong commitment to the welfare of children. Those are all values which have been guiding lights to me throughout my teaching career and throughout my trade union career. So I am especially honoured and pleased to be receiving this particular award, named after one of the early socialist pioneers here in Scotland. I think it's remarkable that we now have such a huge consensus within the education system in Scotland about the importance of these values of equity and equality, and I think we've probably never as a system been more focused on that single objective. So I'm delighted to receive the award. I see it as a reflection of the work I've done with colleagues throughout the years, both in the schools I've worked in and through my union activity. And I wish all of you the very best going forward as we continue to champion those absolutely fundamental principles. So thank you again for the award, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person in the not too distant future. Thank you very much, colleagues.